Nature Solutionaries is a podcast about conservationists who do amazing things for nature and bring inspiration into our lives. Today I'm talking to two ladies from Guyana Marine Conservation Society. Annette Arjoon-Martins, a well-known Guyanese conservationist and pilot who founded the organization in 2000. And Ivana Thompson, a young and passionate marine biologist who focuses on sea turtles. Together, we'll speak about the protection of sea turtles in Shell Beach, about Barima Mora Passage, one of the largest, most intact mangrove ecosystems in the world, and the challenges that Guyana's nature is facing. So my first question is, Annette, most people are either conservationists or pilots, but you're both. How do you manage to combine these two professions?
Because I've been blessed to, one, live in a country that's so spectacularly beautiful that at a very early age, it instilled a great love of nature in me. And when I was educated and was given an opportunity to choose my calling, I chose to become a pilot. And of course, choosing that profession was because I wanted to be able to go to every length and breadth and across the width of Guyana to see more of what we have, a very precious resource in a time when these environmental assets are becoming scarcer and scarcer.
And you are equally a conservationist, so that's very interesting because most people are either a pilot or a conservationist, but you're both. And we'll talk about your conservation work now. You're renowned for the conservation of sea turtles on Shell Beach, which is a 120-kilometer long beach located on the Atlantic coast of Guyana near the Venezuelan border. What is so special about this place? Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to protect this area?
Well, first of all, I want to give thanks to those whose shoulders I stand on, namely Dr. Peter Pritchard, an English biologist that came to Guyana in the early 60s and established that Guyana had 4 of the 7 marine species of sea turtles in the world. And he befriended an indigenous sea turtle hunter by the name of Audley James, who was converted from a sea turtle hunter into a sea turtle protector. And with the two of them, they started a very remarkable sea turtle conservation program, which was successful even before I became involved. So my role in 1989 came about when I flew Dr. Pritchard out to Shell Beach and asked him what he was doing out there every year coming to our country. And he offered to take me along to Shell Beach. And I went there. And that night on a sea turtle patrol, I saw my first green sea turtle. It was love at first sight. And I immediately became his unofficial liaison. And in 2000, I founded the Guyana Marine Turtle Conservation Society, which was basically to do sea turtle conservation. The question is why and why Shell Beach? Shell Beach is the only uninterrupted stretch of beautiful nesting grounds for these marine sea turtles. It is very wild and undeveloped, so it's a very isolated nesting beach and full of all sort of rich biodiversity, including mangroves. And if you wanted to really go and see nature in its most rawest form, that would be where you would want to go to see your sea turtles nesting during the seasons from March to August. So I did that for many years. I was very involved in the sea turtle program until Shell Beach became a protected area in 2011. And then our Protected Areas Commission was set up and the management of Shell Beach fell under that agency. But I collaborate very closely with the Protected Areas Commission and other areas of work.
Okay, well, wonderful. You summed it up beautifully. I'll just remind the listeners that Shell Beach is a nesting site for 4 of the 8 sea turtle species, the green, hawksbill turtle, leatherback, and the olive ridley turtles. And I also read somewhere that there are about 200 migratory and resident species that live in this area. So it's not just about turtles, but it's an important area or ecosystem. And but one interesting thing is when you came to this area, you quickly realized that the local people eat turtle meat and eggs because it's their only source of protein. How long did it take you to persuade them to stop hunting turtles and to protect them instead?
One of the things that you need to know about me is that my mother is an Arawak, which is one of the 9 indigenous First Peoples of Guyana. And being an Arawak, I grew up with a very strong appreciation of our indigenous culture, and using sea turtle meat and eggs for protein was not something that I discovered when Dr. Pritchard took me to Shell Beach in 1989. It was something that I know is a very important source of protein for our indigenous peoples. So for me, it was not good enough to just focus on the species without addressing the needs of Guyana's First Peoples who've been using this source of protein for centuries. So Dr. Pritchard and I agreed that while he was going to focus on the conservation of just the sea turtles alone, that I would do both. I would work with him on the conservation program as well as look at an alternative livelihood for the indigenous peoples that use the sea turtle meat and eggs. I always use my own personal story as a mother of 2 very amazing young children, that if I were living there and my 2 children depended on last sea turtle egg for their survival, I would be the first to go and dig it up. So it was very important for me to look at alternative livelihoods, which we succeeded in doing. And through the very generous support of the German Development Bank, we were able to secure funding of over 250,000 US dollars to work on identifying 5 indigenous products in the area, where we formed the producers into a group, and we worked with them on quality control of the products, packaging, marketing. And I'm happy to say that while the Northwest Organics brand was created in 2006 for that purpose, that not only can these products still be found in all of Guyana's major supermarkets, but 3 of the original producers have branched off and formed their own brands and their own products, and they're also equally successful. So the multiplier effect of our Alternative Livelihoods program is one of the success stories that I'm personally most proud of.
It's very impressive. Is there anything that other conservationists worldwide could learn from this case?
Well, what they could learn is that you have to respect the environmental stewards that you come across when you're doing your conservation work. Oftentimes, it's foreigners coming into the country, and the First Peoples or the local communities are seen as secondary under the science. And in actual fact, when those foreigners come in and do what they do, sometimes without even acknowledging the roles of indigenous peoples, especially, when they leave, there's no sustainability. So it's very important that you really work from the ground up, starting with the people who you met on the ground, and build a partnership rather than top-down hierarchy. So that would be my only message to other conservationists. Equally important as well, though, I want to really applaud the German Development Bank, because I have found them to be one of the most user-friendly donors to have worked with. And they gave us the time and the space to do what we needed to do over 3 years, and the necessary hand-holding was supported, because clearly you could not have gone into a community that had no experience of business enterprises and expect them to all of a sudden get into the commercial sale of their products. So the German Development Bank, their program was very, very pragmatic, and there's no doubt in my mind that contributed tremendously to the successful and sustainable story where over a decade after it was first piloted, the Northwest Organics brand of products that could be found in every single supermarket. And the indigenous women have gone on and formed their own companies and are doing just as good. So it was a beautiful partnership that really worked well.
So, as you're saying, the indigenous people are now founding their own companies, and they're financially they are doing much better. And what about the turtles? How is the situation of sea turtles on Shell Beach now compared to what it was, say, in 2000?
So I wanted to say that I think saying that the indigenous people are doing much better is subjective. I don't think that they are doing any better than when we met them. Actually, when we met them and they were living a very traditional lifestyle, they were probably much better than when we went there and introduced enterprise. Nevertheless, I would want to allow Ivana to speak about how the sea turtles are doing, because that is her passion, and that is how I met her several years ago when she was a third-year student, biology student in our University of Guyana. So, Ivana, I would like to segue over to you for you to speak about your passion.
Okay. So thank you, Annette, and thank you, Veronica, for having me. So with regards to the sea turtles, I can definitely give you the standpoint of the perception of persons that are on Shell Beach and also some of the neighboring communities. Now, there has been some education and some awareness campaigns with regards to the sea turtles, talking about their status, talking about ways we can protect them, talking about the types that we have on Shell Beach. However, there's still a lot of work to be done with regards to sensitizing or educating more persons on their protection, especially with regard to the fact that we now have a new industry in our country. So the time is even more important now that persons come on board and persons understand how important sea turtles are, so that they can understand more of how to protect them, and they can also promote campaigns that are geared towards their protection.
What are the biggest threats that the sea turtles are now facing on Shell Beach? Because I thought that now that it's a protected area, they're doing much better, but apparently there are new threats.
Okay, so it's not a case where there is a new existing threat, but there can be the possibility of threats to the sea turtles within budding oil and gas industry. It's not a case where we can say at this moment that we have the data to prove that that has already started to happen or anything like that. Besides that, though, there are still cases where persons that, especially persons not from Shell Beach, but persons from neighboring communities, are still of the belief that they should poach sea turtles, and also with regards to fisheries bycatch, not allow for the sea turtles, or not promote sea turtle survival by the accidental bycatch and then just throwing back the dead sea turtle back into the water. So there are some threats, some existing threats, especially from the poaching and from the incidental bycatch. And as we know, perception influences behavior. So in some of these cases, persons don't know about the sea turtle's importance, so they don't know to do better when it comes to making sure that they're released properly, or making sure that they don't poach the sea turtles.
Mm-hmm. And so what are you doing now to protect the turtles? What's your main task?
Okay, well, let me just say that I am currently finishing off my master's degree, and I'm focusing obviously on sea turtles, but the Shell Beach protected area does have its own managing authority, and they have been doing the work to protect the area. However, I like to provide the research standpoint, because research, in addition to sea turtles being my passion, I have a real passion for research. So my goal, especially now that I'm back in Guyana, is to help add to the baseline that we have, the limited baseline that we have, and to also try to have updated data on the status of the sea turtles, on management plans that we can have for the sea turtles, and obviously the perception of persons to sea turtles, because like I said, perception influences behavior. So in a way, trying to find out what people know, and while finding out what people know, trying to educate them on what they should know so that they can make better decisions when it comes to their conservation.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of numbers, you're saying that you're doing a lot of research. So can you give us an estimate of how many turtles come to nest on Shell Beach?
Well, that is actually a part of the baseline data that we need. That is budding research. So that is actually on the to-do list, as you can say for now.
Mm-hmm.
Finding out how much, finding out their patterns, and finding out if it's a case that we can still say that there are 4, or we have more now or less, or so on.
Let's talk a little bit about the mangrove forests now, because that's very important. So Annette, while you were working on Shell Beach, you realized that it's important not only to protect individual species such as sea turtles, but also their habitat. And in 2010, your NGO took part in the Guyana Mangrove Restoration Project, which aims to restore and preserve traditional mangrove forests as a barrier to the invading sea. But before we talk about this project, I know that this may sound too simplistic for you, but not so much for the listeners. Can you explain briefly why climate change poses such a threat to Guyana and why mangrove forests are so important?
So Guyana is blessed with abundant natural resources, but our historical context also proved challenging, where when the Dutch were in Guyana and they established very large sugarcane plantations, these were all established along our very low-lying coastal plain, because the fertility of the soil in this area is very, very rich. So most of our coastline is 7 feet below sea level. And whilst in the days of the Dutch, the plantation owners were responsible for the maintenance of the sea dams, as it became more and more expensive to do so, a lot of them abandoned their plantations and the nature took its course. So if you were flying from Guyana to Suriname, which is on our east, you will see a line of cokers, which some people might know as sluices, in the middle of the ocean. And this would have indicated where our coastline used to be in the last century. So what has happened since then is that our government realized the importance of the mangrove forest being a soft part of our sea defense infrastructure, and they prioritized its protection by launching the mangrove restoration program in 2009, which was funded by the European Union and the government of Guyana. So in terms of your question asking why are mangroves so important in a time of climate change, the answer would be very simple, in that 1 kilometer of concrete sea defense costs us about $5 million US per kilometer. Yes, that is $5 million US per kilometer for 1 kilometer of concrete sea defense. Whereas, of course, where they're intact mangroves forest, they serve the same purpose of protecting us from the sea. And they are, of course, are very, very economical, even if you had to replant a kilometer of mangrove forest to do the same job. It will be much less than, let's say, 10,000 US. So the cost is, of course, huge, and the benefits is even better. So that is my answer in terms of a very simple manner.
Well, I also read that mangroves provide about 5 to 10 times more carbon storage than the terrestrial forest, and obviously they protect the land from high tides and flooding. So indeed, mangrove forests are very important. But unfortunately, since 1990, about 3/4 of Guyanese mangroves have been removed. So my question is, how big an area does Guyana want to restore?
So in addition to your pointing out that mangroves are very important for sequestering carbon, I just want to add that mangrove forests, most people don't know what they are, but they're forests that are found on our coastlines. And the mangroves sequester many, many more times carbon than the tropical forests because of the rate that they grow. They grow much faster and they store a lot of their carbon, of course, in their roots. In addition to being a carbon sequestration asset, the mangroves are also nurseries for fisheries. So Guyana's very rich coastal waters is provided with fishing stock because of these mangrove forests as well. So there's a direct link between the volume of our fisheries and the state of our mangroves. And of course, they also provide important homes for the many migratory species. You'd mentioned some of them that are found in the Shell Beach area. So in terms of the mangrove restoration project that was funded by the European Union and the government of Guyana in 2009, that project restored over 11 kilometers of mangroves, which may sound like a small amount on a coastline that's 431 kilometers long. However, again, what happened is that there was the multiplier effect, because when the mangroves got mature, they mature very quickly. So like within 9 months of us planting the mangrove seedlings and they began to reproduce, where they dropped their seeds and the currents took them away, wherever those seeds ended up in the mud banks, which were high enough that the elevation was just right for regeneration, that in itself started regenerating naturally. And it sort of crawled all the way down the coast, where we have more than 11 kilometers, 3 times as much restored by just the natural regeneration. So I think since that program had a very large awareness component as well, a lot of Guyanese are now very aware of the importance of mangroves to our sea defense and their own protection from the elements. So there's less indiscriminate cutting down of mangroves by communities who live along the coastline. The big threat right now for Guyana is because we have found oil in 2015, 9 billion barrels and counting. A lot of the shore bases that will be required to support the development of our oil sector are located on our riverbanks, where we also have very intact mangrove forests. So the need would be to balance the removal of the mangroves for the shore-based development and the protection of those vulnerable riverbanks as well. So we need to find a balance to ensure that is done in a very sensible manner.
One question, just very short one. These 11 kilometers that were restored, was it on Shell Beach?
No, the mangrove restoration project did not include Region 1, because that is where the most intact mangrove forests exist. So Shell Beach is Region 1. Guyana is divided into 10 administrative regions, and the coastal regions are Regions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So the mangrove restoration program focused on Region 4, 5, and 6, because that is where the majority of Guyana's population reside. So if you think of a compromised coastline where, let's say, 90% of our population resides, you could sort of get an understanding of the importance of why we need to have our population protected from the encroaching sea. So the mangrove forests take on a very new and important pillar in terms of our sea defense structures.
And are there more initiative, or is this initiative still going? Like you said that 11 kilometers were planted, but about 33 in total because the seeds spread spontaneously. So now I read that National Agricultural Research and Extension Institute is responsible for this project. So are they now planting seedlings in other parts so that they restore more mangroves?
Excellent question. And yes, NARI, which is the government agency responsible for agriculture and also the Mangrove Secretariat, they have not only established a very vibrant monitoring program to monitor the 11 kilometers that were replanted, as well as the 33 kilometers that were naturally regenerated. What they have gone on to do is to also replant mangroves in other regions, such as region 2 and 3, where a lot of our agriculture exists. Guyana has a very rich and vibrant agriculture sector, and we're a very food secure nation with the capacity to feed the rest of the Caribbean as well. So the mangroves being replanted in the agricultural regions especially contributes to the protection of those agricultural farms. And what NARI has also done is they have also started experimenting with spartina grass, which is also reproducing very rapidly and doesn't, protect the coast as much as the mangroves, but it certainly holds the mud banks together and reduce the erosion process that would normally happen anyway. So they're also doing a lot of other experimentation in addition to replanting mangroves. And I would like to acknowledge the role of Ms. Keen Mosley, who heads that program, and her team, who are doing a really excellent job.
Wonderful. That's nice to hear that there's still that the work is still going on, and that there are more mangroves being replanted now. I watched this one video which said that 2 out of 3 trees in mangrove forests in Guyana stand in the Barima Mora region. That's region 1, right? And Barima Mora Passage spans across 1,000 square kilometers, and it's one of the largest, most intact mangrove ecosystems in the world, as well as one of the world's most valuable carbon sinks. And it's home to a number of IUCN Red listed species, rich biodiversity, and Amerindian communities. Currently, this area is unprotected, but together with marine biologist Felicia Collins, you've been trying to make this area become a World Heritage Site. I want to ask you, how far are you in the process of entering this on the list?
Part of the European Union funding for massive Guyana mangrove restoration program was that we must have 2 sites identified as mangrove reserves. So Ms. Keen Mosley, who heads the mangrove program, selected one in region 6 that was restored. And I recommended that we have the other one in region 1, where the most intact mangrove ecosystems exist. So you'd have a comparison of one area that was restored in a very commercial area, and then you have the most intact mangrove ecosystem in the entire country that is really relatively undeveloped and only inhabited by our indigenous peoples, the Arawaks, the Waraos, and the Caribs. So the young marine biologist Felicia Collins, who you'd have seen was the anchor in the documentary, The Barima Mora Passage, which could be found on the Real Guyana YouTube channel. That is REELGUYANA. You would see where she's speaking about the incredibly rich biodiversity and how important it is that we actually have 4 of the IUCN species existing there. This is the jaguar, the puma, the manatees, and the giant river otters. But apart from that, it is a very rich feeding ground for the Waraos as well. And their indigenous lifestyles remain largely intact in this very special area. So we had a consultant that came to do an assessment of the area for the European Union, and he was actually blown away that not only is this the largest intact mangrove ecosystem in the entire country, but it has a lot of the elements to be nominated as a World Heritage Site. So with the support of a German NGO called ARA, they funded some research which Felicia Collins is leading through a collaboration with the University of Florida. And they have just finished setting 36 camera traps in the area, which they will be retrieving in May to start documenting what other species are there. There will be a stakeholder consultation program that will be supported by Conservation International Guyana, where we're going to make sure that the stakeholders in the area also are on board from the get-go. And then, of course, after that, we'll have to go through the other processes to eventually reach for the actual nomination. I am hopeful that in another year, hopefully in time for World Mangrove Day next year, that we would have completed all of the necessary baselines and to have that area submitted for consideration by UNESCO. Guyana is the only country in South that does not have a World Heritage Site. And this area is right next to the Shell Beach Protected Area, Guyana's only coastal protected area. And both of these areas are in the direct line of being impacted if, heaven forbid, the ExxonMobil oil company should have an oil spill that will be unmitigated. The Guyana current will take the oil right into these two areas. Hence, it's very important that the Barima Mora Passage be given the extra protection of a World Heritage Site in a time of oil and all that it could bring, both good and bad. So I'm hopeful that in a year's time, we would have completed all of the relevant research. And without also acknowledging Felicia and her team of indigenous people that are involved in her research, I would also add that Ivana, who's on the call with us, would also be contributing to document the sensitive species in the area.
It's wonderful because I just wanted to ask Ivana if she could tell us more about the research in this area.
So I think when it comes to the sensitivity studies and so on, I'll add it would have said a lot about what we plan to have research and also what is going on right now. But what we used as a foundation for this research is determining, like she said, the sensitive areas. What are the sensitive ecosystems that we have here? And obviously sensitivity would be dependent on the status of the different species that we plan to research, and additionally any perceiving threats. So we would have prepared a sort of proposal looking at what we have and looking at their IUCN status, whether it's endangered, critically endangered. Obviously the sea turtles would be one of that, and some shorebirds, and also our marine fishes and so on. And based on that, we'll be able to say, okay, well, this is we look at where they reside and then say, okay, this is one of the sensitive ecosystems, and this is where we can find some of the species that we need to have an updated baseline on. So prior to us looking at that area, because we do know that that area has a bunch of sensitive species that we need to keep up to date when it comes to the baseline, the population numbers, interest, etc. We were able to look at it from the standpoint of what is their IUCN status, what are the perceived threats, so that we can use that as a foundation to do our further studies.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's fascinating for me to hear this because I often talk to conservationists who I don't know how to explain that. Like, they have their species, they try to protect it, and a lot is already known about the species, or at least about its habitat. But what is fascinating about your work is that from what I hear, it seems like nobody before you went to study this area. So like you're one of the first people who are going there and really studying it deeply. Am I getting the right impression?
Well, I wouldn't really say that we're the first people there, because I know that there have been some private um research, or maybe some research we might not have heard about previous years ago. But it's just a case where we're now trying to offer not only an updated form of the research, but also we're offering research that would be accessible to everybody. So just like you just said that, it seems like we're the first set of people. There's a possibility that there might have been research there before, but in the case of people actually publishing it or making it known to the rest of Guyana and regional and international phases, that has that has probably not been done. So it seems like if now us going and do this research in this area has been untouched and so on. And in addition to getting this research done, that is what we're trying to change. We're trying to provide research or provide baseline data that can be accessible to anybody that would like to utilize it as a foundation for them to now go and build their research on.
Mm-hmm. When I talked to Annette 1 week ago, she told me that for another 1 month you will be unavailable because you will be doing the field work and there is no internet. So can you tell me a little bit how the field work looks like, how your research looks like, your day or the whole month, what you will be doing?
I think you're mistaken here. I think Annette was talking about my colleague Felicia Collins. So she is actually in the field doing the field work right now. I am in town finishing off my master's, and then possibly I might join her. But she would possibly be the best person, or Annette, to answer this question, because before I came back, she has been doing most of the field research and working along with the indigenous people and so on.
Yeah, what I want to add, Veronica, is Ivana is correct. There has been some research in the general area, but not specifically in the Barima Mora Passage. So, for example, there is a wonderful research, 2 volumes of research on the non-timber forest products of Region 1, which includes part of the Barima Mora Passage research that was done by Tindy van Andel, a Dutch researcher from University of Utrecht in the late 1990s, I think it was. And of course, the indigenous peoples depend heavily on the non-timber forest products that are found there. There's lots of medicinal oils and the natural wild honey, etc. However, what is different from any research that's been done is that Felicia Collins, who is a young marine biologist from the area in Region 1, she has undertaken the research with a group of young persons, indigenous youngsters from the area. So this is the first time, a first for Guyana, that you have a young researcher from Region 1 working with a team of other young indigenous researchers from the area in this very special place that has all of the capacity to be a site. And what is more remarkable is Felicia is now working with our Protected Areas Commission at Shell Beach with the Sea Turtle Project for the 6 months from March to August. And she was able to take 3 of those young indigenous researchers with her to join her in the Sea Turtle program at Shell Beach. So in a way, we are sort of coming full circle, where when I started working at Shell Beach in 1989, many decades ago, and working closely with indigenous communities there in a very grassroots capacity, not with a whole lot of science at the time. I'm just a pilot, not a scientist. Mm-hmm. Here we have, 40 years later, a young indigenous resident from the region leading the marine science of not only the Sea Turtle Conservation Program, but also in working on the research to make the Barima Mora Passage become a World Heritage Site. So I think it's a beautiful segue for me personally in terms of my decades of marine conservation work, to really now be passing the torch to our young marine scientists such as Felicia Collins and Ivana, who's about to complete her master's in marine and terrestrial ecosystems. So the Guyana Marine Conservation Society is going to be embarking on the next decade with the strongest science it's ever had. And for me, it's very exciting times indeed.
I can hear the enthusiasm in your voice, and I'm happy for you. It's very important to have young people who follow up on other people's work, because nothing can be just one man show, right? The work has to continue, and nature needs to be protected. One thing I'm still curious about. The indigenous people who live in Barima Mora Passage are fully dependent on mangroves for their livelihood. Yet due to a shortage of economic opportunities and influx of Venezuelan migrants, the forests are being cut down. I wonder, how threatened are these forests now?
Well, the thing is, Venezuela was very good to Guyana when their economy was booming, and there has always been an informal movement of Waraos from the Orinoco Delta in Venezuela and the Waraos in Guyana. A lot of them actually are families. So when Venezuela started having its economic meltdown and the social programs that supported the Waraos there started to dry up, some of them started to come into Guyana, looking for, of course, opportunities to ride the tide out. So they set up habitats along the rivers, and indeed, some mangroves were cut for homesteads. However, since then, our government has embarked on a very massive humanitarian program for the Venezuelan migrants. So they're giving them support, and also reducing in the amount of mangrove forests that are being lost. Because, for example, there's a center in a place called Cans Hill and Whitewater, where we have centers set up to provide the support, including of late educational programs teaching the Warao children English. So that has really assisted in decreasing the pressure that they were having on the environment. So I'm hopeful that this will be increased over the coming period, and I am sure that when things in Venezuela improves, you might potentially end up having some of the families relocating again, because they are not all coming and staying here. They're transient. They go and come. It's never enough to rest on your laurels because of your social programs for migrants and say, okay, well, look, let's just leave it. I think part of Felicia's job with the indigenous researchers she's working on will be to also go into some of those communities where the mangroves are being cut down and raise the awareness of why it should not happen. So I'm sure that over the next coming months, this will be done, and we'll have more understanding in the Waraos themselves. So we're also looking at how do we assist in reducing some of the pressures. And one of the things we have done is we have looked at the potential of research tourism. So, for example, we have partnered with the University of Florida, where during the spring break, some of their students will come and help us with the research in the area as well. And of course, they will pay the local Waraos as their guides to go out and do the research. And we will have a very basic research station set up. So Iwakrama, which is in the heart of Guyana, has been doing research tourism for almost 25 years. And we will be partnering with them to really get our research station set up properly and to tap into that international academic clientele where international researchers could also come and work along in the area. So we're looking at alternatives that are different from what I did when I took the 5 indigenous products, namely crabwood oil, which is a medicinal oil, organic cocoa sticks, cassava bread and cassava casrip and found markets for them in the international supermarkets in Georgetown. We're now looking at research tourism and also equipping some of the youngsters in the areas with drones. So they will basically use the drones to monitor the deforestation, whether it's by warao migrants from Venezuela or whether it's from any sort of industrial development. And they'll be able to sell their data, the footage of their drone flying, to the agencies in Georgetown that don't have a presence in the region, but want to keep an eye on the destruction of the natural resources in this very remote area. So this is also exciting for me because as a young indigenous girl who was given an opportunity to go and learn to fly an aircraft 40 years ago, equipping young girls, especially with the technology to be able to fly drones and monitor the natural resources in their communities, and then to monetize that data. This is also for me a very exciting project that I am really keen to have succeed. So this is basically what's going on in terms of the deforestation and how we intend to monitor and manage it.
You need to be really innovative to think in this way. I have never heard of research tourism, never ever, but it makes sense, definitely. It's a good idea because it's such a pristine area, right? So obviously people from other parts of the world, I mean scientists, will want to come there and study it. So that's a brilliant idea. I remember that last time we talked, you said that while the government takes care of mangrove protection and monitoring, you're helping local communities to find alternative livelihoods. And you mentioned tour of mangrove forest and river tour as well. Can you speak about that too?
Well, part of the research tourism will include the waraos who have their canoes and their boats, providing the transportation to the visitors, whether they're university students who are doing research or whether it's, tourists who right now, I know there is a move away from the highly populated places because of COVID, where people are looking for remote, untouched places where they could enjoy it without having to run into a whole lot of other people. So whether it's visitors coming to look for the beauty of an untouched place, going off with a local warao to go and fish or to bird watch, they will be paying the waraos in the area for providing that service. So in terms of the research tourism and the traditional tourism, and with the development of the blue economy, of which, the indigenous communities need to carve out their own niche, I think this is a perfect opportunity where our blue economy would include not only the big commercial operations such as shipping and oil and gas and the fishing, but also would include indigenous peoples in the program. So there's lots of opportunity, I think, as well for the inclusion of the Barima Mora Passage in our blue economy plan when that's developed.
And do you see the government, the government's interest in including the indigenous people in this blue economy plan, or do you think that they're more about the quick money return like gas, oil?
One of the good things about the present administration is they actually have a history of very strong environmental leadership and very strong engagement with indigenous communities. So for example, in 2009, our then President Bharat Jagdeo, had created the low carbon development strategy, which the mangrove restoration program was part of, and which I chaired that initiative for many years. The entire, utilization of our forest to be monetized, where Norway paid us $50 million a year, I sat on the national committee, which was the multi-stakeholder steering committee, and $10 million was allocated for programs in indigenous communities. There was also an Amerindian Development Fund, which stimulated a lot of enterprise as well. So the good thing about the present administration is that they have a very strong track record of including indigenous peoples in whatever development, national development takes place. And I know that the vice president, who was the president in 2009, Dr. Bharat Jagdeo, is looking at the low carbon development strategy being expanded to include biodiversity, watersheds, and the blue economy. So undoubtedly, our indigenous people will have their rightful place at that table because the majority of those natural assets exist in their backyards.
Both of you mentioned the potential threat of the oil spill. And I would like to ask Ivana that since the discovery of more than 9 billion barrels of oil and gas off the Guyana coast, ExxonMobil and its partners have started drilling the oil. And while this may sound great for the economy, it poses a great threat to marine ecosystems. Ivana, can you tell us a bit about what a potential spill would mean for the sea turtles and for the ecosystem in whole?
Okay, so one of the reasons why it's important that we look at the potential threat when it comes to the oil and gas is because the one of the first blocks that they found, the Starbuck block, is less than 200 kilometers away from the nesting beach, Shell Beach. So because of that, if there was to have a spill, it can directly impact or directly affect the sea turtles that are found nesting there. Now, with regards to how it could impact them, the fact that the spill could happen, especially spill happening in our marine environment and causing the water now to become polluted, this can directly lead to the death of these sea turtles because their bodies are not able to, depending on the level of the spill, obviously, able to withstand the pollution level that would come from, especially if it's a great spill, that can come from a great spill in the waterways, because obviously, when it comes to this, these substances getting into their systems, it can cause things like lung damage and so on. So because of that, any spill that is to happen could directly impact specifically the sea turtles, not only because of the proximity, but also because of the fact that their bodies are unable to withstand any sort of, especially a great level of intake when it comes to the substances that are used in the oil and gas drilling. In saying that, though, I think it's important that I mention that one of the things that us, more specifically Annette, has pushed for is having that baseline so that we're able to know what it is that is going on right now and we can make provision for it. Because it's not a case where we're saying to you that, okay, we feel like, okay, development should be stopped and we should just allow the sea turtles to roam and just focus on the conservation side. Us as conservationists believe that there should be and there can be a balance, and that's where research comes in. So that's one of the things that Annette and Guyana Marine Conservation Society has pushed for, allowing a thorough baseline assessment of how it could be impacted in terms of proximity, in terms of wind currents. If it's a case that there's an oil spill, would the oil spill go more towards the Shell Beach, or would it go away from the Shell Beach based on the wind currents, based on the wave action, etc.? So all of those parameters are things that need to be considered in determining how big of an impact it would be to our sea turtles. And with the only way that we can figure this out is with research.
So while the focus is always on an oil spill, I guess because we've seen what the oil spill, the Exxon Valdez oil spill did in terms of its devastation to biodiversity and livelihoods in Alaska, some of it which remains uncompensated to date. I think we also need to also remind ourselves that there's also many other forms of pollution from the oil sector, such as when the fuel tankers come to uplift our oil, where do they discharge their ballast water? So at the moment, each fuel tanker comes to uplift 1 million barrels of oil, and they would have come with 1 million barrels of ballast water. Where is that ballast water being discharged, and how is it being treated? Because we have had the marine science tell us all over the world where you've had irresponsible discharge of ballast water, the decimation that invasive species would pose on your local marine environment. That is one. The second thing is, even though the operations is 200 kilometers offshore, we have an increase in marine vessel traffic from our main port, which is in Georgetown, to the oil platform, which has tripled since the discovery of oil in 2015. And how does that impact marine life? Well, we know from studies that were done in Suriname, our neighbor, that the sperm whales and their calves would pass through our migratory corridors between the months of March and April. We have other migratory species. We also have other marine species that utilize this migratory corridor. Clearly, the increase in vessel traffic will have impacts during the breeding season of these marine mammals. And this is where the research Ivana referred to that I've been screaming for the past 5 years remains outstanding. So we know from what the research said in Suriname about this shared migratory corridor, what is happening, but we also need to have our own national research done. At this point, I want to really bring in our international partners who we've signed an MOU with last year, February 24th, the 14th of February. There's an international organization called Global Fishing Watch, which was created by Oceana and SkyTruth. There's Google, and SkyTruth, and we have signed an MOU with them. So we have access to their data in real time, which is incredible. So Global Fishing Watch has included the Guyana Marine Conservation Society in the development of a specific marine spatial management tool that is called the Global Fishing Watch Marine Management Tool. And Guyana is going to be a pilot in the application of this tool. And what it does basically is uses technology to give you information on tides and currents, on the chlorophyll in the water, on a lot of things. So before, where we didn't have the resources, and we still don't have the resources to go out there in a boat with students, collect all of this data, we now have international partners that are giving all of this, and best of all, for free. So for me, the most exciting thing, other than having 4 young marine scientists on board the Guyana Marine Conservation Society in 2021, is also our international partnerships with international NGOs, such as Global Fishing Watch and SkyTruth, that has a global program since 2011, where they monitor flaring all across the world. And we could also get information on what is happening on Exxon's FPSO with regards to flaring, which we could not have even dreamt about a year ago. So indeed, having the local marine scientists on board, having access to international NGOs with the superior technological capacity, the Guyana Marine Conservation Society is really in a very pivotal period of transition, where I think we are going to really grow from strength to strength moving forward.
And This sounds very hopeful and optimistic. I just wonder what it's like to come into contact with Exxon. Do they understand that you're concerned about the oil spill? Do they talk to you? Like, do you communicate with openly with them, or how do they feel about your concerns?
Well, Exxon came into Guyana at the same time when the New Yorker was doing their expose about their climate denial campaign. And I don't think that a company comes into a new country and changes their culture overnight. I think, sitting at the table with Exxon in 2015, when I begged them to please allow their protected species observers to talk to us whenever they came back from their contracts offshore, because we didn't have a clue what was in our marine waters other than the most popular fish that we eat. And they were very uncooperative and never facilitated that. So when I continued to say, look, with the oil find that they had and the projected oil finds that they were expecting to have, that Guyana did not have a single protected species observer nationally, and that in terms of what they were planning and projecting, we needed to have at least a dozen protected species observer rather than having to depend on international protected species observers all the time. It took about 3 years for me to convince them to actually utilize our young Guyanese to be trained as protected species observers. And I'm happy to say that 3 of our marine turtle rangers are now qualified protected species observer, but that's only 3 in a time when we need now in 2021, 2 dozen. So it's small baby steps, and Exxon is not very open to support our conservation efforts, even to get our young University of Guyana researchers to go out with their consultants, a company called ERM that does all of their environmental impact assessments. I had to go to the executive director of the Environmental Protection Agency for them to allow that. So they don't give very easily. And I think that going forward, the only way we could get Exxon to really come on board, to see us as a partner rather than as a foe, would basically depend on our government, taking a very strong position that if there's a local NGO like the Guyana Marine Conservation Society that has the marine scientists that are available to be part of the team doing the work in terms of the environmental impact assessments or the marine science, I am thinking that that is one of the way we could make faster progress, unless, of course, Exxon comes around and realizes that, look, they really need to be sincere about trying to work with local NGOs and to find ways of partnering for the protection of our marine environment, and it's a win-win to do so. So in a nutshell, I'm yet to see that Exxon sees the value of collaborating with NGOs such as ours. I see that our government will play a pivotal role in that coming about. And let's see what happens going forward.
You know, the prevention of the oil spill is the most important thing. It's so important for the protection of Shell Beach and Barima Mora Passage. So do you think that are they ready to talk to you about this research or about ways to prevent this spill from happening?
Well, I think that is not our responsibility to prevent a spill. I think that, which incidentally right now has had repeat problems with their gas compressors, and they have been flaring gas for 1.5 years now continuously. Last time I checked, they were flaring about 16 million cubic feet of gas per day. If you were to use that as a yardstick, as to the environmental consequences of their operations and the challenges of them to get that right, even though they were lauded as the gold standard in oil operations. It makes me very frightened about if indeed, heaven forbid, there was an oil spill, would it take as long to have it addressed? But it's not our responsibility, nor do we have the requisite expertise to play any role in them preventing having an oil spill. What our government has done, though, is it has established a national oil spill response plan, and our government has included the Guyana Marine Conservation Society on that national committee with specific responsibilities of dealing with response to oil animals and working in the Shell Beach protected area. So we ourselves need to have a lot of capacity in that area. We actually need Exxon to go out and do an actual oil spill drill, as they're required to do every year in the Shell Beach protected area. It's not good enough to go and do a drill on a man-made lake, which they're presently doing at the back of our international airport. The geographic and environmental conditions are the total polar opposite on a man-made lake to the Shell Beach Ocean, where you have 12 and 20-foot waves any day. So I think in terms of getting those preconditions done, in terms of us having an annual coastal sensitivity map done by our NGO and the inclusion of our indigenous peoples that know that area like the back of their hand, these are some of the practical things that we have the institutional memory, the traditional knowledge, and the skill sets to do. And then, of course, we also sit on the National Oil Spill Committee, so we could provide our government with the support that we have the capacity to provide if there was an oil spill. And it is the role of our Environmental Protection Agency and our Ministry of Natural Resources to ensure that Exxon's operations are efficient and safe and would reduce the possibility of an oil spill.
I'm wondering whether the profits from oil industry have impact on the local people, like if they benefit from this oil industry, if you've seen any impact.
Well, I just mentioned that several of our sea turtle rangers have been trained as protected species observers. So, for example, as a sea turtle ranger, they would earn at the most maybe $300 US a month. Right now, as protected species observers, they're paid like $70 US a day. So that's clearly an impact, albeit small, from the local level. One of the things that our government has done, which will guarantee even more benefits, is that it's created a local content plan. What the local content plan means is that any service that the oil industry needs, and there are Guyanese companies that have the capacity to provide it, the Guyanese companies have to be contracted first. So that has already been proving some benefits to the small companies that have the capacity to offer like shore bases facilities or brokerage services or recruitment of staff. So yes, the Guyanese companies have been benefiting. And best of all, the previous administration had established a natural resource fund, which the present administration has recently updated us. I think has about $260 million US deposited in it. So they were sort of looking at the Norwegian model, where you have a sovereign wealth fund, and then that fund is used for specific developmental purposes of the citizens to whom the oil belongs. The government is just basically the stewards for that resource on behalf of its citizen. So we've also had a lot of scholarships that have been opened up now to Guyanese across the length and breadth of the country, including indigenous communities. So in terms of the educational benefits, yes, it's there. I would want to ask Ivana to come in from her perspective as a young Guyanese academic as well, what she would think some of the areas that those scholarships could be relevant to in terms of the capacity we need for the oil and gas sector as well.
Okay, so like Annette mentioned, the scholarship, the potential opportunities for not only scholarships but jobs can be increased now that we have the oil and gas industry. Speaking from the standpoint of this, me as a budding marine biologist, I can say that we have a very limited number of marine biologists in Guyana to date, and the field of marine biology, whether it be the general marine biology field or more specific to fisheries, more specific to sea turtles, marine mammals, etc., or even the specific field of water quality, is definitely something that we would need to get done, or we would need more but more scholarships for those type of research, because as we know, this industry is something very new to Guyana. And because of that, we need the persons now to be able to do the research so that we can be able to have Guyanese that are skilled and would have had their accreditations or would have had their studies done in related fields. Additionally, looking at it not from a conservation standpoint, but also from the oil and gas standpoint, obviously we would need scholarships or more research or more persons to jump on board to deal with more oil and gas studies, whether it be the drilling techniques, whether it be the quality of oil and gas drilling, or even from a more technical standpoint, talking about the FPSOs, etc. So I believe, especially with this industry and the fact that it's now new to Guyana, that the possibilities for research, and with research the related scholarships, is endless at this point, because this is a field that persons would have not previously, or even if they would have previously studied it, not to the extent that we would need it to be studied now, not in the capacity that we would need now. So that's just to name a few.
But Veronica, to add what Ivana just mentioned in terms of the relevant scholarships for marine scientists, I think what is totally lacking is the local counterpart placements. So for example, if you're studying marine science, you're gaining the academic knowledge, but I think what could be very useful is to also have the local counterpart placements within the oil companies. So these young marine scientists could be getting practical experience while they're also pursuing higher learning. And when they graduate, they're much stronger than now starting to get local counterpart placements. So I think that is important. And if I come back to my first conversation with Exxon in 2015, when I was begging them to have their protected species observers come ashore and talk to us in the Guyana Marine Conservation Society, and they didn't. Ideally, what I would have loved even then was to have some of our sea turtle rangers be placed as local counterparts and go offshore with those protected species observers, so they could have been exposed to the exciting career of becoming a protected species observer. And then if you have your training program for protected species observers, have a percentage reserved for youngsters from the indigenous communities as well, so they could also benefit. So I think it's a real interesting time in terms of the opportunities that are arising, and it's up to us to keep on speaking about the opportunities we would like to see. And I really thank you for reaching out to us on your podcast to start this conversation, and hopefully the next time we speak, we could be able to report on a lot more positive developments.
Yeah, it's fascinating that there are both big threats but also big opportunities that the oil industry is bringing, right? To conclude this interview, I have two last questions for both of you. Okay, so what is the most important lesson that you have learned about conservation? So Annette, you can start, and then Ivana can follow up.
The most important lesson I've learned about conservation are, one, that your conservation efforts will fail unless you include the local stakeholders that live within or around the resource that you're hoping to conserve. And two, and very, very important, conservation without financial resources to make it possible will remain just a conversation.
And speaking of that, Guyana Marine Conservation Society is funded by international donors, or how is it funded?
Presently, our projects, like I mentioned, our project of the Northwest Organics was funded by the German Development Bank. We also received funding from many organizations such as the United States, USAID, UNDP, the Caribbean Aquaterrestrial Solutions Project, and Flora and Fauna UK. So we've had a lot of, and of course, most importantly, I should remember to mention the World Wildlife Fund was our first ever donor from the time the Guyana Marine Conservation Society was established in 2000. The World Wildlife Fund came on board since then, and it has remained with the program for the last 21 years. So the WWF has been our most enduring donor, and I would like to applaud their longevity. It speaks volumes to their commitment to the sea turtle and the conservation program in Shell Beach.
They're a very good organization. And Ivana, what's your most important lesson about conservation?
Okay, so I also have two. One is kind of similar to what Annette said first, that a major component of conservation is research. Because if we don't know what is out there, if we don't know what it is that we have, if we don't know the IUCN status of our species or ecosystems, etc., then our conservation efforts might be in vain. So it's as important to have the research first so that we can make or we can have management strategies geared towards the conservation of the ecosystems or the species. Secondly, and this is something that I would have learned over the last recent set of years, is that conservation or protection is not something that should stand on its own, and that it should continue to happen with development. So it's not a case where everybody in the world needs to put a pause on development for the sake of conservation. It shouldn't work like that, because humans are our most important resources. So development, whether it be financially, whether it be having more schools, or even the social parts of development, is as important as it is the conservation or protection part. And in saying that, I'm looking back at the term we all know as sustainable development, where we're talking about not only having an environmental sustainability, but the social and economic sustainability. So that is the second thing that has resonated with me for the past couple of years.
Okay, thank you. That sounds very reasonable. You're totally right. And the last question that I like to ask all the guests of this podcast is, can you say one simple thing anyone can do today to help protect nature?
Well, the first thing that you need to do to help protect nature is to find a small project in your neighborhood that is protecting nature and get involved. The first small, tiny step is the beginning of a very important journey. And for the sake of the present and future generations, we need to start that journey sooner than later.
Okay, thank you, Annette. And what would you say, Ivana?
Okay, the one thing that I would talk about, and that's because I feel like this has been a persistent issue, especially for the last couple of years, is reducing the level to which we pollute our litter. And this doesn't necessarily only mean persons should look at how they would dump their garbage unsustainably, whether it's throwing it out of a window or just leaving it at whatever event or wherever they decide to branch out to outside of their homes. But this also comes with how their consumer methods, whether it be a case where they utilize a lot of single-use plastics, etc. So I think one thing that persons can do or can start to do just from today is to look at not only their methods of polluting the environment, but also their methods of consuming stuff or utilizing stuff like single-use plastics, because that has been a major and a rising issue for the past couple of years. So definitely that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to both of you. It's been really wonderful. I learned a lot of new things and it was a very inspiring talk. I want to wish you good luck with protecting the mangroves and sea turtles and preventing the oil spill. And I wish you all the best and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having us.
You're most welcome and remain safe.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe to get notified when new episodes are live and also give a rating. I would be very grateful for that. If you know about any other inspiring conservationists, feel free to send me your tip at veroperkova@gmail.com. That's VEROPERKOVA@gmail.com. Alrighty, that's it from me today. See you next time.